For generations, there was one name that echoed across the galaxy with this mix of awe and, honestly, sheer terror: the Kairos. They built a galactic empire on a mountain of wealth, terrifying military might, and some truly forbidden science. But like all empires, it was destined to fall. So today, we're going to dissect the anatomy of that fall, a story that is absolutely written in red. This was their war cry: Halasi Kairo, blood or war. And let me tell you, this wasn't just some chant, it was a promise. It was the entire philosophy of a people, basically declaring that their dominance was completely non-negotiable. The only other option? Yeah, that would be violence. It just perfectly captures the brutal spirit of their Red Empire. And that really brings us to the big question here, doesn't it? How does a power that seems so absolute, one that controls currency, armies, even life itself, just vanish? How did the undisputed masters of the galaxy end up, consumed by fire and literally drowned in blood? Let's find out. Okay, so to really understand the fall, we have to start with the foundation. The Kairian legacy wasn't just built, it was forged. Forged in conquest, in fire, and in this core belief that they were entitled to everything. You see, this is where it all began, this ancient split in ideology. The ancestors of the Kairos, the Modrans, they believed that every single resource in the universe was for human use, period. No limits. Their rivals, the religions, they preached restraint. Well, you can guess who won that war. The Modran philosophy of use everything, conquer everything, that became the very DNA of the Kairian Empire. And this was the heart of their power, the Kairian Castle. It wasn't just a building. It was a statement, a massive dystopian pyramid looming over their capital, Eldora, that cast this literal shadow over its own people. It was the physical proof of their oppressive, top-down rule. So you might be asking, how in the world did they maintain that rule for so long? Well, it all rested on three core pillars: their system of governance, their absolute control over the economy, and, of course, their terrifying guards. So let's break those down. First, you've got this rigid hierarchical government where power was absolute and just passed down through bloodlines. Second, total economic dominance. They literally controlled the universal currency. And third, a military so powerful its name was basically synonymous with death itself. These three things working together made the empire feel absolutely invincible. And right at the very top of this whole thing, you got King Shalimaan, the richest man in the galaxy. He ruled from what was called the High Table, a council that was exclusively for those with royal Kairian blood. I mean, we're talking about a system built from the ground up on nepotism and pure autocratic power. Now, let's talk about the enforcers. Meet the Marshals. Their white and gold armor was meant to symbolize Kairian purity, but every other detail was designed to inspire fear. Those terrifying black masks, and worst of all, their piercing red eyes that just seemed to hunt for your soul. They were the constant, ever-present threat that kept the entire empire in line. This quote says it all, really. And this wasn't an exaggeration, This was the lived reality for anyone who even thought about crossing the Kairos. The Marshals were the walking, breathing embodiment of the regime's cruelty, a promise of a swift and very brutal end. But their power wasn't just in soldiers and money. No. The Kairos kept their edge through a forbidden arsenal, using deeply unethical science to achieve supremacy at any cost. And this is where things get really dark. First up, we have to talk about Carbonium Armour. This stuff didn't just protect the person wearing it, it weaponized their emotions. Can you imagine your own fury or even your grief amplified thousands of times over, turning you into a literally unstoppable force of nature? Yeah, that was the tech worn by the Kairian elite. And it gets darker. Project MK Ultron was probably the regime's most horrific secret. Using something they called a neural override procedure, they could actually animate the dead, creating a synthetic army of corpses that would obey every single command without fear, without pain, without hesitation. A literal army of the dead. And finally, their ultimate trump card, Project Ragnarok, a single missile capable of total planetary annihilation. This wasn't really a weapon of war, it was a tool of pure terror, designed to erase entire worlds from existence just to enlighten their enemies. This was the true source of their power: fear. So, with all that power, how did it all come crashing down? Well, the fall of the pyramid wasn't just one single event. It was a perfect storm of biological warfare, strategic genius, and a rebellion that hit them from all sides at once. The beginning of the end didn't come from a bomb, but from biology. The rebels unleashed what's called a biotelem plague right into Eldora's water supply, and it was devastating. It caused mass casualties and just completely collapsed the city's infrastructure from the inside out. It even took down their elite marshals before the first real shot was ever fired. And from there, it was a chain reaction. The plague crippled their defenses, which allowed the rebels to capture the absolutely critical fortress of Pimpri. With that fortress down, they launched a massive forefront assault on the capital. And at the height of the battle, King Shalimaan himself was slain. A swift, brutal, perfectly executed collapse. The leadership was just completely dismantled. King Shalimaan killed in a final duel. Super Marshal Agora, their deadliest warrior, was disintegrated in a cosmic explosion. And Minister JD, the guy who architected all their cruelty, was cornered and brutally bludgeoned to death. The pyramid didn't just crack, it was ground into dust. But the story doesn't end there. Victory came at a price, and a final, horrifying act of vengeance would end up staining the rebellion forever, raising a new, much darker question. These were the words spoken by the rebel leader Shuban Ruby as he stood before the last remnants of the Carian royal family. They don't deserve to live. A simple sentence that was about to trigger an interstellar crisis. And what followed was a massacre. The entire royal family, and we're talking mostly women and children here, were incinerated with flamethrowers. This act was a massive breach of interstellar law, a war crime that became known across the entire galaxy as the Sin of Victory. The rebellion had won, but in those final moments, they had become monstrous too. The consequences were immediate. The Intergalactic Treaty Organization, or IGTO, responded by deploying their most feared legion, the Blood Reapers. And you have to understand, the Reapers don't show up to aid or stabilize. Their mandate is simple. They erase problems, permanently. Which leaves us with this one final, lingering question. The Kairos built a red empire on a philosophy of blood or war. Their fall was just as bloody. But when its tyrant is overthrown by such brutal means, who's left to clean up all the blood? And what new horrors might rise from the stains they leave behind?